What if the voice calling your name in the dark wasn't yours, but it sounded exactly like you? Jessica adjusted the straps on her backpack as she surveyed the trail ahead. Coldwater Forest was breathtaking in late October, with its canopy of fiery orange and crimson leaves filtering the fading sunlight. Hiking alone was her escape from the chaos of her day-to-day life, a chance to disconnect and find peace. But today felt different. The usual chirps and rustles of the forest were absent, replaced by a heavy silence. Her boots crunched against the carpet of dry leaves as she moved, each step echoing unnaturally loud in the stillness. She told herself it was nothing. Probably just the season, she muttered under her breath, her own voice breaking the eerie quiet. But that silence was broken by something else. Jessica. She stopped dead in her tracks. Her heart skipped. The sound was faint, distant, and eerily familiar. It wasn't just someone calling her name. It sounded like her voice. "Hello?" she called, spinning around, her breath visible in the crisp air. No response. She peered into the woods, the trees thick and shadowed, but there was no one. The hair on the back of her neck prickled. Still, she reasoned, it must have been the wind, a trick of her imagination. After all, she was alone. She pressed on, quickening her pace. 20 minutes later, Jessica was nearly at the halfway point of the trail. The earlier tension had begun to ebb away, replaced by the rhythmic calm of her footsteps. She even caught herself humming, a habit that comforted her on longer hikes. But then she heard it again. Jessica. This time, it was louder. Closer. She froze, the weight of her pack suddenly oppressive on her shoulders. Her flashlight, clipped to her hip, dangled uselessly in the growing dusk. She gripped it and clicked it on, the beam cutting through the dim light as she scanned the trees. "Who's there?" she demanded, her voice trembling. No answer. "Hello?" The silence stretched uncomfortably. Her pulse quickened. Something wasn't right. The voice wasn't just calling her name, it had been pleading. "Jessica? Help me." The words sent ice down her spine. The voice sounded like hers, but twisted, as though spoken through a faulty speaker. Against every instinct, she turned toward the sound, her feet crunching against the forest floor as she stepped off the trail. The forest off the path was nothing like the trail. The trees were closer together, their branches gnarled and knotted like arthritic fingers reaching toward the sky. The ground was uneven, soft and wet, and the smell of damp earth filled her nose. Her flashlight flickered. She smacked it against her palm until the beam steadied. "Jessica. Hurry." The voice was louder now, coming from somewhere deeper in the woods. She hesitated. Was someone really out there? Or was she walking into something worse? She tightened her grip on the flashlight and pressed on, the sound of her breathing loud in her ears. As she moved further into the forest, the trees seemed to warp. Their trunks twisted unnaturally, and the shadows they cast stretched and shifted, as if alive. The ground beneath her boots grew softer, sinking slightly with each step. She shone her flashlight downward, but the beam only illuminated patches of rotting leaves and moss. Then she saw the clearing. Moonlight spilled into the small, circular space, illuminating a figure standing in the center. Jessica's breath caught. It was her. The woman looked exactly like her, same hiking jacket, same auburn hair pulled into a bun. But there was something wrong. The eyes were too wide, and the smile was stretched unnaturally, as though her face were a mask someone had pulled too tight. Jessica's fingers tightened around her flashlight. "Who are you?" The figure tilted its head, mimicking her movements perfectly. Then it spoke, its voice identical to hers. "Jessica, you called me." "What are you talking about?" Jessica stammered, taking a step back. The smile widened. "I'm your echo." Jessica shook her head, her mind racing. "No, this isn't real. You're not real." The echo took a step closer, its movements jerky but deliberate. "Every time you spoke your name in the silence, I heard you, I followed you, and now I'm here." Jessica's chest tightened. She thought of all the times she'd muttered her name on lonely hikes, a nervous habit that she'd never thought twice about. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The echo's expression shifted, its smile faltering. "I want to live." Jessica turned and ran. Branches clawed at her jacket, roots snagged at her boots, but she didn't stop. Her lungs burned, and her heart pounded as she crashed through the underbrush, barely noticing the scratches on her arms and face. Behind her, the echo's laughter rang out, A sound so familiar, yet so utterly wrong. "You can't run, Jessica," it called. "You can't escape yourself." The flashlight flickered again and died, plunging her into darkness. She fumbled for her phone, her shaking hands struggling to unlock it. The forest felt alive, the trees pressing closer, their shadows twisting unnaturally. She tripped, falling hard onto the damp ground. The phone slipped from her grasp, landing somewhere in the leaves. Panic clawed at her as she scrambled to her feet, but the echo was there, blocking her path. Its smile was gone now, replaced by something colder. "Tired yet?" it asked. Jessica's hand went to her backpack, her fingers closing around the handle of her survival knife. She pulled it out, the blade glinting faintly in the moonlight. "Stay back." The echo cocked its head. "You think you can hurt me?" it asked, its voice layered with something inhuman. "I'm part of you." Jessica's knuckles whitened around the knife. "Maybe," she said, "but I'm not letting you take me." The echo lunged, its limbs elongating unnaturally as it reached for her. Jessica slashed wildly, the blade connecting with something solid. The echo screamed, a sound that sent shockwaves through the forest. It staggered back, clutching at its side, where black, tar-like liquid oozed from the wound. Its form began to shift, its features distorting further until it was barely recognizable as human. "You'll regret that," it hissed, its voice cracking and warping. Jessica didn't wait to hear more. She turned and ran, her legs trembling with exhaustion. Somehow she found the trail again, the familiar dirt path, a lifeline in the chaos. The echo's screams faded as she ran, but she didn't stop until she reached her car. She slammed the door shut, locked it, and fumbled with her keys. Her hands were shaking so badly it took several tries to start the engine. Finally, the car roared to life, and she sped away. Her breath began to steady as the forest receded in her rearview mirror. But then she noticed something. Her reflection in the mirror was smiling. She wasn't.